oddly enough, I'm talking to my father on the phone one day, and he's like, "Hey, I saw this video on YouTube, right?" And my dad, he's up there, so YouTube. I'm like him and YouTube. I'm like, "Oh, you're watching YouTube?" He's like, "Yeah, I saw this video, and this guy was talking about short-term rentals." And I was like, "What is short-term rentals?" And he was like, "Yeah, that's what I said, but it sounds pretty interesting. I know you like to do this entrepreneurial stuff. Let me send you this link." So he sends me the link or whatever, and I'm looking at it, and lo and behold, it's our good friend Jay Massey, right? And so I'm looking at now. Here's the thing. When I left my W-2 in 2014, I started a podcast, right? Because you know who was hot back then was John Lee Dumas. So I just knew I was going to be the next black John Lee Dumas, right? So I'm like, I'm going to podcast every day, and I'm going to do all this stuff. And so in that process of going through my first podcast, I was working with the podcast connection lady. I can't think of her name right offhand, but she queued me up with Jay to do an interview, right? And so so Jay was one of the people in probably the first dozen people that I interviewed. Jay was in that group. And so so I had known Jay from that podcast from back in 2014. Now we're in 2017. And I'm learning about these short-term rentals. So he's like, so I'm watching the video. I was like, what the, what's Jay doing, doing short-term rentals? And then it got my attention. So long story short, my wife and he ended up hosting a mastermind out in California with some other short-term rental operators. And even the person that helped him get into the game was part of this group. So we were like, oh yeah, we're fixing to go check this out. So he flew out there to the mastermind event, kind of, learned in a weekend, basically like what it took to get this thing up and running. And we said, we could do this back in Texas. Like this seems legit. And the rest is history, man. We came back, put our heads down and went to work.
What's up, everybody? My name's Mike Sjogren, here with my co-host,
Emmanuel Pani.
We're part of a group of specialized real estate investors you've probably never heard of.
We didn't start with deep pockets or wealthy families, and we don't rely on 401ks, mutual funds, or traditional real estate investing.
In fact, many of us don't even own the properties that fund our freedom. If you ask the money experts out there, they'd say what we do is impossible, yet it's happening every single day.
It's happening through a new niche called short-term rentals.
We are Short-Term Rental Nation, and these are our secrets. What's going on, STR Nation? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Boostly. Now, you may remember episode 40 and 41 with Mark Simpson. He's the founder of Boostly, where we did a 2-part series on the 5 steps for turning lookers into bookers. Mark is the king of direct bookings, and his company Boostly specializes in creating hospitality websites. Yes, for short-term rentals, boutique hotels, they specialize in building websites that turn lookers into bookers. So if you're in the market to get your own direct booking website and stop relying on all the OTAs like Airbnb and Booking.com and paying them their commissions, you need a direct booking website, and Boostly is the company to do that for you. They have several different options for you. They can build everything for you, do it all for you, or you can purchase one of their pre-designed templates and just fill in all your information. Okay? But the cool thing with Boostly is they are the only company to offer a 100% money back guarantee. Meaning whatever you pay for this package with them, if you do not make that money back with direct bookings, they'll give you your money back. So there is literally no risk for you. So make sure you guys go check out boostly.co.uk/STR secrets. Again, that's boostly.co.uk/STR secrets to learn more. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Short-Term Rental Secrets podcast. I am your host, Mike Sjogren, here with my main man and brother from another mother, Mr. Emmanuel Pani. What is going on, E?
My brother, so good to be here. Lovely to see you. That deck at the Cove looks amazing. And guys, if you're not following the Cove on Instagram, it makes me so jealous because it looks so good. And now here, we're getting to the time of the year that I hate going outside. It is 90 degrees from like 7:30 in the morning, and there's just no break. But life has been good, man. Crazy, and you and I have talked about this off air the other day. Highest level of occupancy that I have ever seen in 10 years of doing this for the off season, shoulder season. I have never never experienced this level of occupancy into early summer, like just unheard of. And I'm talking about like 65% pre-COVID occupancy to we closed April at 94%, and we're tracking 85% for May. It's just
Love it.
wild.
Yeah. We've been saying it for a while though. Like the wave is coming because people have been pent up for a year. They want to get out. They want to, start traveling again and taking vacations and doing what they want to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have no more restrictions here. We don't even have to wear masks to go to the gym or anything like that anymore. So it's just
Floridians, man. It's like
Wild West, bro. Wild West. That's why the Florida man is a thing, right? Like that's why the news is always somebody in Florida did something, But yeah, man, life is good.
I love it. Yeah, today's actually my son's 5th birthday. So
happy birthday.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited. So after we record this, gonna go play with him the rest of the day and hang out. And my entire house is looking like SpongeBob's dungeon over here. It's pretty fun, but excited for that. And then yeah, man, just kicking into high gear. Finally finished the deck renovation that took way longer than it was supposed to, but it looks awesome. And I'm so glad the way it came out. And now we're working on this other one. So hopefully that's going to go live early June. Got the team over there right now, finishing setting up some stuff. Got the cleaners coming in next week, scheduling some contractors to finish setting some vanities. And you guys know all that fun stuff that
Showtime.
It's game time now. So
love it.
So I'm excited, man. But I'm really excited for our guest today, who we've connected with a bunch offline and through Clubhouse and just gotten to know him. And he's just a genuinely awesome human being that I love spending time with. And he's super giving with his knowledge and his expertise, which spans a ton of different places that I didn't even realize. We were talking off air of all the stuff he's done, throughout his career. And it's pretty amazing. So today we have Noble Crawford III with us. He's a 7-year business owner and principal partner in the short-term rental industry. His diverse background spans several years in hospitality, technology, and sales and marketing. He's worked with brands like Marriott, Hilton, IHG, and a bunch more. And his experience enables him to teach his students how to collaborate with multifamily owners and property management firms to create win-win partnerships on the rental arbitrage side. So without further ado, Mr. Crawford, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Been a long time coming.
Yes, sir. We're excited to have you. So why don't you kind of run it back a little bit, kind of give us like the 2 to 3 minute rundown on your background and how you got into the short-term rental space.
Sure. So, like you said, my background goes back, 20 plus years, kind of getting started in the hospitality space. My first job in hospitality was with a Marriott, right? So a full service property. And I was young. My wife and I were recently been married. We had our first child and everything. And so I'm already working one job, right? But I'm a go-getter, right? So I'm like, I got to make it happen for the family, this sort of thing. And so I went out and got a second job. So I'm working 2 full-time jobs. It was absolutely crazy, right? But one of those jobs during the day was at a Marriott. And I was working in the conference setup department. So, right, we handle making sure all the conferences and all the tables and chairs and everything gets set up. And I was in there for a couple of months, and opening came available in the audio visual department. Okay. And so that's where you're setting up the projectors, the sound systems, and all of that good stuff for meetings and conventions and so on. And so I jumped into that opportunity. I was like, I get to play with all of this. At the time was like really high tech stuff, right? And so I was like, I get to play with all of these high-tech toys during the day and hobnob with these CEOs and even celebrities at times. And so I was like all in. I'm like, oh, this is it right here, right? And so I cut my teeth really in the hotel space on the event services side. And I kind of went up through the ranks over the years, and I learned, video production. I learned the audio and the mixing console and running the boards. And I learned, the lighting and I kind of graduated through the ranks all the way up to becoming what they consider technology director or director of event services, different titles like that. And so I I worked over time. I worked at Marriott. I worked at Hilton. I worked at the Intercontinental Hotel Group. I've worked at a Holiday Inn. I've worked at all of these different brands. I worked at convention centers. My one of my last jobs was at so American Airlines is based here in Dallas-Fort Worth in Texas, and they have a training facility, just a full-blown wide training facility where they train all of their flight attendants and folks like that and different staff people. And so my last job kind of in that event space, or one of my last positions in that event space was I was a technology director over that entire facility. And so, we obviously there was a lot of meeting room space there, a lot of event space there. So I kind of oversaw that. And when I exited that position, I transferred with another company up to Little Rock, and I got a chance to work at the Peabody Hotels, director of technology up there, and then the convention center, handling some pretty large scale events for the governor and some different things. And so over the years, I've worked with some really big events and brands with dignitaries of state and Dallas Cowboys, Eagles concert. So it was a ton of fun. So I exited that and I went into home theater. I was like, this is the natural progression, right? I've done all the live event stuff, and now I get to help people set up like cool home theater rooms. So I went into home theater, and I was doing that for probably a couple of years, and it was fun. And then an opportunity became available where I could get involved on the commercial side. So not selling into individual residences, but selling into my verticals was higher education was one, and corporate was the one, and then government was another. So we were going into like universities and colleges, and I was more of a kind of a design sales guy. We're designing and selling systems for full-blown automation and auditoriums and things like that, right? So everything you can imagine technology wise, like I've probably sold it at some point or another. So that was my last W-2 job, was on the sales side of technology, right? And the way I exited that one, my story is not too dissimilar from yours, Mike, to be honest with you. My wife, she ended up getting sick. She got diagnosed with a brain tumor. This is back in 2008, right? During going through the whole economic crisis and everything that happened from the crash back then. And so obviously she had to go in and have the surgery done, have the tumor removed. So went through that whole process after they found the tumor, went through the surgery, the surgery was probably double the time it should have been because a little bit of complication, but they did get the tumor out. So she's in ICU and in recovery. And about the second or third day, she's getting to the point to where she's not coherent, post surgery. She's not like really, she's in and out, I should say. Right. And so it gets to the point to where she's trying to pull all of her tubes out. Like she's having these spells where she's trying to pull all of her tubes out, and we couldn't like figure out what was wrong. Right. And it's pretty scary. And then long story short, she ended up flatlining in the ICU. Okay. And, she was gone for like almost 4 minutes. This is a long 4 minutes for me, right? And so I am, and I get a little worked up when I tell the story, so I have to keep it at bay. But essentially, what happened was she was allergic to morphine, and they had put her on a morphine drip for like 2.5 days. It was making her organs shut down, and so they resuscitated her. They pulled the paddles out and did the whole 9 yards. And about 4 minutes later, they brought her back, and she's still here today, thank God. And all is well. But what happened was I left during that post recovery time period. I left that I didn't leave the W-2, but I took time away to take care of my wife because she had to relearn a whole bunch of stuff, like even down to walking, how to use her fork and bring it to her mouth, the speech, the whole nine. So it was either me go to work or me stay home with my wife. And I chose to stay home and take care of my wife, right? Well, when I got back to work, I got berated in a company-wide sales meeting for dismal sales numbers. Now, everybody knew what was going on in my family. Everybody knew like I was out because my wife just had brain surgery and all the complications. And yet and still the CEO decides to chastise me literally in front of the whole company. And like yourself, for me, that was the moment I said, I am not going to ever be in a position again where I can't have time available to care for my loved ones, my family, and be in this situation. And I made the decision right there. And so I went hard in that sales job because it was commission based. And I basically bought myself out of a W-2 over the next couple of years. I cashed out on some huge deals that allowed me to exit that. And then when I did that, because I had been in the technology space for so long and developed so many relationships, I immediately started a marketing agency with those relationships and got that up and running. And I still have that today. I'm not as active in it. My son runs a lot of that, but yeah, that's the trajectory I took. And then a few years after that, I was introduced to short-term rentals. And I said, this looks really good, because the marketing thing is nice, but it's still a lot of work, right? It's still a lot of hands-on time. And I was like, I can do this over here and spend less time and not affect my quality of life. Actually could be better. And so I dove in, and the rest is history, as they say.
Dude, I got goosebumps listening to that story.
Yeah.
Like I heard it before, but it was like an abridged version. I mean,
no, I had no clue, and like I didn't know where. Like it felt like Game of Thrones season 1, like when it was still really good. That you didn't know where the episode was going at any given time. And then he's like, and then I did this, and I did this. I'm like, oh my god, like how many lives? Like how old are you? I'm like, holy shit, that's amazing.
I'm up there.
He's a seasoned 32-year-old right now.
Yeah.
Young.
I'm like, damn. So when you say you were introduced to vacation rentals, what did that look like? Like you were introduced, meaning like you guys went on a vacation, or somebody came up to you and was like, there is this thing called rental arbitrage. Like, what was that?
Got it. So I was actually, oddly enough, I'm talking to my father on the phone one day, and he's like, hey, I saw this video on YouTube, right? And, my dad, he's up there. So YouTube, I'm like, him and YouTube, I'm like, oh, you were watching YouTube? He's like, yeah, I saw this video. And this guy was talking about short-term rentals. And I was like, what is short-term rentals? And he was like, yeah, that's what I said, but it sounds pretty interesting. I know you like to do this entrepreneurial stuff. Let me send you this link. So he sends me the link or whatever, and I'm looking at it. And lo and behold, it's our good friend Jay Massey, right? And so I'm looking at now. Here's the thing: when I left my W-2 in 2014, I started a podcast, right? Because who was hot back then was John Lee Dumas. So I just knew I was going to be the next Black John Lee Dumas, right? So I'm like, I'm going to podcast every day, and I'm going to do all this stuff. And so in that process of going through my first podcast, I was working with the podcast connection lady. I can't think of her name right offhand, but she queued me up with Jay to do an interview, right? And so so Jay was one of the people in probably the first dozen people that I interviewed. Jay was in that group. And so so I had known Jay from that podcast from back in 2014. Now we're in 2017. And I'm learning about these short-term rentals. So he's like, so I'm watching the video. I was like, what the, what's Jay doing, doing short-term rentals? And then it got my attention. So long story short, my wife and he ended up hosting a mastermind out in California with some other short-term rental operators. And even the person that helped him get into the game was part of this group. So we were like, oh yeah, we're fixing to go check this out. So he flew out there to the mastermind event, kind of, learned in a weekend, basically like what it took to get this thing up and running. And we said, we could do this back in Texas. Like this seems legit. And the rest is history, man. We came back, put our heads down, and went to work.
Love that. Love that. And so how is your portfolio grown? So just for anybody that's new to the podcast, there's 3 different ways that you can do this business. You can buy properties. You could master lease somebody else's, which is what Noble does, and we'll talk about that. Or you could co-host or partner and manage somebody else's property. So what did that first deal look like for you? And then where are you at now with your portfolio? And what was kind of like that progression for you?
Got it. So so we've always done rental arbitrage. I take that, but we've done a co-hosting a time or two, but it's kind of like one-off stuff for people asking us. But for the most part, we've always done rental arbitrage. Always been with multifamily for the most part. And so we got our first unit in a multifamily complex. And it was scary because these one of those businesses that you don't really know what you don't know. until you actually get out there and start doing it, right? And so so the first part of that, and probably the most scariest for anybody getting started, is having those conversations, right? It's human nature that we don't like rejection, right? And so, kind of getting to a mental space where you look forward to no's, because the more no's you get, you'll eventually get to that one yes, right? So we went through that whole process. There was a paradigm shift for my wife, right? I'm coming out of sales, so I'm like, we gotta have these conversations, and she's like, I don't like this. So once we kind of graduated past that and having those conversations and learning those pain points and learning how to get to yes, it was gangbusters. But the first one was just a simple multifamily, but then right on the heels of that, we did a duplex property that was majorly successful, and that even gave us more ammunition. And then we've kind of stacked up since then, and we've hit some peaks. I mean, we got up to over almost 36 at one point, and then during the COVID, we started just cutting units, slashing the units that weren't as profitable as we wanted them to be. And now we're ramping back up. So we're up to 28, but depending on when this airs, that might be 38. So just inked another 10 units. So yeah, nice. That's kind of the path we took.
Tell me about these 10 units real quick. So did you take like a whole building or a floor, or tell me about these 10?
So there's an apartment community. And so it's a traditional apartment community, not a high rise or anything like that. But it's pretty kind of spread out. And so because of the kind of the era that we're in now with the economy and the COVID and everything, our situation here, because I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth market in Texas, is not too different than a lot of markets around the country, where you have these multifamily properties that are struggling because, one, they've got tenants in them with this rent moratorium. They got tenants in them that aren't paying and may not pay, before the end of June. They've had tenants that have moved out because of job loss or whatever, or what have you, over the past year. And their vacancy rates have dropped. And so we simply have I don't have these conversations directly now. I actually have a business development guy that comes alongside now, and I've trained him and onboarded him to have these conversations. So he's kind of like bird hunter for going out and finding new deals. When we say, hey, we want to add something, boom, he goes out. Now, part of that is based on relationships that we developed over time with property owners. Okay. And so because we have a lot of direct relationships here in the Texas market anyway, a lot of times when we say go, we want to add some more, he picks up the phone, and that actually, he makes it happen. And so, and this was no different. And so we have contacts here of properties here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We wanted to go ahead and expand from some assets that we were sitting on from having cut back from COVID. You never want to be in that situation where you're sitting on furniture and storage and it's not making you money, right? And so we had a little bit left that we had to move. And so it just, as it turns out, there was 10 available that we could take. And so we took that deal. But that's how that worked out.
Gotcha. And that kind of leads me perfectly into what my next questions was, which is what I always wonder for the arbitrage people. But once you get to your level, TJ's level, I think this kind of changes. But it's, do you guys buy all the furniture, and then if you do need to move out of the unit, you have a central location that you can go put it into? Do you just rent a like self-storage unit? What does that kind of system looks like for you guys?
Got it. So that was actually a new process for us, because that was driven more because of COVID. And so we hadn't been in that situation before. So, but what we did was when COVID hit, we didn't lose any. We lost 2 bookings. Okay. And so from that regard, like, people think, well, wow, that's great, you're doing good. And that was fine. But the issue was that the new bookings fell off quite a bit. Right. So although we only lost 2 existing bookings, the new bookings fell off quite a bit. And so as we're looking at that and kind of doing our forecasts and projections, we also just said, hey, let's look at where we can trim some fat, right? Let's look at where we can cut our expenses, where we can operate more leanly. And let's look at those properties in our portfolio that aren't as profitable as we had initially thought that they would be. And it just the timing couldn't have worked out better because we were coming up on some leases that were ending where we had to decide were we were going to renew or not. And these were the non-performing ones, right? And so we started cutting. We essentially we didn't renew those leases, right? But then because of the situation we were in, we were still kind of trying to maneuver and pivot and do everything we could to stay profitable and and keep running during this time frame. And so because we didn't know what our next move was going to be, then we knew we had to put that furniture somewhere, right? And so we put it in storage temporarily until we decided, hey, we're going to start grabbing property here and there. And so so that's not a practice that we had been through before, nor that we had to do before. It was very brand new to us, and it was all driven by COVID. But yes, it's furniture set in storage. And as we started onboarding new units and spinning up new properties, then we would pull stuff out as needed.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the things that I think differentiates you and your business a little bit is you've been heavy, and probably because your background in marketing and sales, heavy on the direct booking side. We've talked offline quite a bit about this, but, when you started, was it, heavy on Airbnb, and then how has that progressed, and kind of talk through some of your strategies, right? Where you're building a lot of relationships to keep your units full.
Absolutely. So when we started, we were very intentional about a couple of things. One of those being, so I was already familiar with the whole corporate housing model, and I knew, because I had stayed in corporate housing, right? And so I knew that the traditional corporate housing model takes the rent, adds $1,000 to it, and that's kind of their play, right? And so I kind of had an idea of how corporate housing worked. The short-term rental part was a little bit newer to me, but I knew from the beginning that we wanted to be more of a hybrid operation, whereby we accommodated short-term, under 30-day staying guests and longer staying, midterm to longer staying guests, because I was familiar with the corporate housing model and I kind of liked certain aspects of it. And so because we were I anticipated us operating in this kind of hybrid model. We were very intentional about how we set up our operation. And that hybrid model included direct bookings because that is how a lot of corporate housing works, right? And so from how the relationship thing benefited us is I said, okay, if I want to host both short-term, midterm, and longer-term stays, and I want to do it in multifamily properties, then I need to get out here and I need to develop a relationship with these property owners, right? And because here's what happened in the very beginning. I was having the conversations with property management, okay? And in the first multifamily that we picked up, the management changed hands. And when the management changed hands, the new management came in and said, yeah, we don't allow this, right? And so we had to pivot at that point and move our inventory to another property. And so that left a bad taste in my mouth. And I was like, I don't want to be in that position where I'm having to move units, right? So I said, well, I need to have those conversations at the highest level, and that's with the ownership. And so I started going to real estate conferences, specifically multifamily real estate conferences, because I knew and understood that this is where my client base would be, and this is where they hang out, and these are the type of events they attend, right? And this was stuff that I had learned in marketing, and so I went to my first real estate conference here in Dallas. It was a pretty good size one. I was the only guy in the room talking about short-term rentals. So on breaks, I was having multiple conversations with guys about short-term. They didn't even this is back in 2017. They didn't even fully understand and grasp the concept of the business model. It was intriguing to them and they were interested, but it was tell me more. Right. And so that's really kind of what spurred it for us, was developing those relationships. And we actually landed deals out of those relationships. And to this day, we get deals from that very first conference that I went to. And I continued to go to conferences, more conferences. Now, when I'm having a conversation, I'm usually more often than not having it at the ownership level. And then when those decisions are made at the ownership level, then property management is told, here's what we're going to do, here's who we're going to do it with, and here's how it's going to work. And so we're not in a situation any longer where, we're a different property management company comes in and we're being put out. In fact, because we're having conversations at the ownership level, as you all very well know, multifamily ownership can change hands anywhere from 3 to 7 years on average, right? But when that ownership changes hands, usually the conversation from one owner to the next is favorable towards us, right? As opposed to new ownership coming in with a new property manager, you got to go, right? Move your 10 units. So it changes the dynamic of the entire conversation because you're having a conversation at the highest level.
I love that, man. I love that.
That was so good. And sorry, Mike, I think it just goes into something we talked about all the time, is understanding how you present yourself and how to present yourself as an ally and as somebody that, dude, we're going to be solid. Like, we've been solid this entire time. You can sell the property to somebody else, and you can tell them, Noble, he's going to be solid. He's going to take 10 units. You need to take 15 units. He'll take 15. Solid rent. Because at the end of the day, when you think high level and you think like an owner, you know that's what everybody, like, that's what I care about, right? Like, if I'm buying a 40 unit, 50 unit apartment complex, if I know for a fact the 10 units are rented market by somebody that pays me consistent and takes great care of the units,
Yep.
It's a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I'll throw this in too. So at these conferences, we run into these real estate developers, right? So they're building from the ground up. So I was introduced to this one gentleman at the conference, and we kind of developed a relationship, and I was explaining to him the business model and so on and so forth. And he was in the process of breaking ground on a new multifamily development of townhomes, right? And so this particular market that he was breaking ground in, I was on the fence about. I had run some numbers, and I wasn't 1,000% sure it was going to be as profitable as ideal as I'd want it to be. But I was intrigued, and I did want to test the market. And so we had some back and forth conversation. Ultimately, we ended up in a deal with him where we didn't pay no rent. We paid 0 utilities. We didn't pay Wi-Fi. We paid nothing, right? We contractually, there was nothing due to him on a monthly basis. The only thing we did was bring in the furniture, right? And so here's what we said. We said, look here, we think this market could work for a number of reasons, but we want to test it out, right? But here's the deal we're willing to make with you, because it was a new development, right? So you're developing like 100 plus of these pretty, decent sized 3-bedroom townhomes. And so we knew for them, getting that lease up, done quickly is paramount. So we said, look here, we want to take the first handful that you have available, right? And as you're building these out. And what we'll do is we're going to do a rev split, right? And it was at the time when we started, I want to say it was 70-30, our favor. Okay. I think it's 65-45 or 60-40 our favor now. But at the time we started, it was 70-30 our favor, right? So if we flip that whole co-host on his head, okay, and we said, here, we're going to do a revenue share with you. You're not charging us any rent or anything. We're going to make sure the guests come in, the clients come in. But we think that your 30% will cover what you would charge a normal long-term tenant. And if it goes over that, then great, you get to keep the difference, right? So he was like, let's do it. It's exactly what we did. That 30% more than covered what his long-term tenant rent was. And that thing took off. And so it was a very unique kind of creative arrangement, but it was all based on a relationship that was developed over time, meeting someone at a conference. Great.
I love that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been eyeing, there's a brand new development near one of my hotels, brand new. And I have a relationship with the developer. And I'm going back and forth. The rents are premium. And you know me, I'm a co-host guy, or I buy them. I haven't done the rental arbitrage, but you guys got me really considering this one, because the property is sweet. It's a beautiful property, but it's a fairly seasonal location. So that's my only hesitancy. But the way that you played it Did you end up flipping it to a true rental arbitrage, or did you end up keeping the rev share with them, like longer term?
We kept the rev share. The split changed because they caught on after a while, like how much we were killing the game, right? And so we renegotiated a bigger split for them. But we still have never paid a dime in rent, utilities, anything. And so we're not on the hook for any of those units for anything. We have a very easy exit arrangement if we need to exit or pivot. It was very unique but very creative, and it's been a win-win for both sides. And that's something we're very adamant about, is creating win-win opportunities, because if both sides aren't going to win in the deal, then we don't want to play in that game. Like, we don't want to come in where we're winning and they're losing, right? Or vice versa. Because this is not good business, right? And so that is important to us, and that helps the relationships too.
And just to clarify, so you paid for the furniture, you designed it and you built it out, and then you did the rev share.
Yep.
So it's like a hybrid, like you were saying, like
absolutely. Yep.
But it's so brilliant, and for any listeners that maybe have a couple of units, and if you can present this and work the right relationship with a seasoned investor in your local town, you can accomplish this easily, right? You can accomplish the same thing that he has. I mean, if you can do a 70-30, do send us a message, because that's impressive. But I mean, and to me, man, is the constant reminder of just the more you open yourself to allowing everybody else to win, the more opportunities you have. Because that's all it was. Because like you come up and you're like, I'll give you a win-win situation. I'll share my profits. I can guarantee you'll make more money.
Yeah, you're spot on. That's absolutely correct. And for myself, when we have these conversations with new property owners and new landlords and things like that, who either are not familiar with the business model, or if they are, and they are familiar with it, but they want to have a deeper level conversation, then we actually bring that up. That is a talking point for us. And we let them know on the front end, look, this is a negotiation, obviously, so we'll do some back and forth. But we want to land in a place that's both beneficial for you, and that's beneficial for us, and that's beneficial for the guest, right? And so it's kind of a three-way, win, if you will. Because at the end of the day, if you can't check all three of those boxes, it's not a recipe for success, right? So the property owner has to get his in the deal. We need to be profitable, and the guest needs to have a great experience. And when you can check all three of those, and you can scale, it's off to the races.
Love it, man. I love that. One thing I did want to hit on, and I know we're getting close to our time, but the way that you market your units is also different, right? Where you're getting a lot of direct bookings. What would you say is kind of your split now? And I'm also curious, are you, selfishly I'm asking because I had an opportunity to take on a unit on a co-host deal, but there's 30-day restrictions on it. And I was hesitant to do it because it's not really my wheelhouse, but I think you've done some of those, maybe not from a restriction basis, but you've done some more of those midterm stays. And I'd like to just talk about that real quick for myself and for the listeners.
Sure. So that's correct. So we do quite a bit on the direct booking side, right? And part of that was, again, by design, but there's levels to this, right? So we had to graduate to that point. And so currently we're probably we're hovering around 35 to 38% of Airbnb based bookings, right? And that's it. And so that's positive for us for a number of different reasons. And then what's been strange, at least during this COVID period anyway, is that because we do use VRBO also, and we use a couple of other platforms. But what's strange is that the other OTAs carry about the same weight as Airbnb in terms of the ratio of bookings, and then the rest of that is all direct, just purely direct. But as most folks, when they start out, Airbnb is going to be the primary platform. Is going to be the number one resource for their bookings. But here's what we did to generate the direct bookings, right? I did this heavily in the beginning myself, right? So this part of it is hard to scale, but it's very, very effective. Okay. I actually went out when we were determining. So one of the things that we learned from that original mastermind that we went to, right, was we learned to start with the customer first, right? Start with the guest first and then guest avatar. Now, me coming out of a marketing space and having a background with HubSpot inbound marketing, that was ingrained in me, right? We want to start with your customer avatar, if you will. And so when we start looking at properties ourselves and locations and furnishings and everything, we start with what is that guest avatar? What does it look like? That kind of drives a lot of our decision-making process, right? When we're spinning up new properties or servicing guests. And so how that benefited us is when we were looking at locations, we started with what's the customer that we're serving. So one of them, for example, was small government. So we said, okay, what are and the reason I knew this space is because I worked it in my previous W-2. You remember when I explained to you small government was one of the verticals I worked, or the government sector. And so, I knew that government people travel. I knew they traveled under the corporate umbrella. So for us, one of those corporations was a Raytheon. And I've told this story before, but we identify a Raytheon facility in our metro market. And we looked at the housing situation around that location because we knew from some research that these government contractors were coming to this, was one of their headquarter facilities, coming to this facilities for weeks at a time, working on these projects. Okay. And so we looked at what is the existing housing hotel mix in this location, right? And it was sparse at best. And so we said, this is one of our guest avatars. This is someone we can serve, and this is a location that's ideal. There's not a lot of competition right here, right? And so we identified a property, a multifamily property, literally across the street from this Raytheon, right? Now, here's what we did. We went to Raytheon first, okay? We said, this is who we are. This is what we do. We love to be the provider of accommodations for your government contract folks coming in for these different projects. Okay. And then so we had to find out first and foremost, like who under the roof of Raytheon handled that. Turns out through some due diligence and work that it was a third party that handles that globally for them. Right. And so we were given the name of that third party. We had to do some LinkedIn research, doing it all the way down to the person. Long story short, they said, hey, you can be on our you can be a vendor. You can be put on our purchasing list because we traditionally cut POs. We were like, okay, cool. What else? Right. And so we developed that relationship before we went to the property community. Right. Before we went to the complex, we walked into the complex and said, look, we have a contract with these people across the street, and they need to have temporary accommodations for, however long. We would like to get X number of units. We would like to get a discounted rent because we're doing this for a volume play, basically. And we want to do an extended lease term. And we don't want to pay any application or administration fees. And we want the security deposits cut in half. And so this is one property identified, and we identified the one right down the street. But what do you think? Right. And they were game, especially when we said, hey, we're going to go down the street, if you don't like this opportunity. And we still hold that today. We still hold that property today. It performs excellent. That is a direct relationship with a big corporation that has government contract employees coming in for project-based work for weeks and weeks at a time. So that's a foot on the ground, going out, having legit conversations. Not as easy to scale, but when you do the work and you do it once and you do it right, it will pay you dividends over and over and over.
I wish I had an air horn app. Boo, 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 boo.
I was flashing like we do on Clubhouse. That was amazing, and I think Noble, what's so inspiring with you is one how. I mean, you're a hustler, you can tell, right? But to me, going back to what I was saying earlier, the hustler mentality is in seeing the opportunity, creating the win-win, and just doing the legwork. because that's to me literally every single story that I have for like little clips. The same weaving kind of things are there, right? You hustled, you got to know people, you provided value, and you created yourself an opportunity every
Yeah,
single time.
I would agree with that. And again, for for a lot of people, some of these, it's all about relationships to me. It's having those conversations, building those relationships, and leveraging those over the long term. And while going out and literally having the conversations is not the fastest way to scale, it's an exercise, like I said, that you can do once, and it can pay you over and over and over time. And real quick before we fall off here, because I did want to mention this, we were talking about the land development deal. So here's a quick little tidbit for the audience. So if folks that are interested in going after multifamily land developers, right? Now the land development process is kind of lengthy, right? So if you're going to get involved on the early front end of this, just understand it can be kind of lengthy, and so you'll need to have several things going at once, right, at different intervals. But one of the things that we've recently started doing, so coming out of the space that I came out of in commercial kind of sales and technology design, I had a lot of opportunities to work on new building projects, right? And working on those projects, our company was teamed up with these design build firms, right? And so there were design build firms that would handle the design and the build in-house, right? So they had architects in-house to handle design, and they had contractors in-house to handle. So these are big commercial projects, right? So if you're so what we've recently started to do is we've started to go out and develop relationships with design build firms who specialize in, guess what? Multifamily, right? Because as these buildings and these communities continue to pop up, we want to be on the front end of that to say, hey, not only are we going to position ourselves to help you with the lease up early on, but we can tell you some of the creature comforts that will help the property be more profitable from our perspective, right? So if it's 100-unit property and we know that during a lease up, we want to take 20 out of the gate to kind of help you start, get established, then we can tell you from experience that hard surface floors are going to be better than carpeted floors, right? Because people like to drink red wine and grape juice or whatever, and it stains up. You can clean hard surfaces floors a lot better, right? There's certain countertop types that perform better, right? Because some of them are more porous than others, right? And you're going to be dealing with different stains and things, right? Washers and dryers in the units is a plus. So we bring to the table something, and we did this exact same thing with that land developer on those condos. We had these conversations with him before they built them out, and they built them to spec. Almost everything that we asked for, we got. So that's a little trick people can use if they're looking to work with land developers.
Oh my goodness,
that's so good.
I have too many clips. I'm gonna have to cut out some of these clips. I'm only supposed to have 4. I think I have 8 right now. So this is gonna be quite difficult edit for me. Wow, man. What an inspiring! I mean, I knew this was good. That's what we all kept nagging you to come on the show. But it was worth it, man. Like, just the level again, dude. The hustle and the goodness by which you do things, and I honestly think that's probably the greatest reason you've been as successful as you've been, is just such a great attitude and such a great way of looking at problems. And I love the overall message that you got to make yourself uncomfortable, have conversation, get back to selling. And it's funny because I restarted doing that yesterday for my real estate business. The market is so hot that I'm like, I need to start prospecting again and actually calling people. So yesterday set up my dialer, and I used to do this for hours, right? Like I used to have like daily 4 or 5 hours a day. But yesterday, after my first phone calls, the first 4 just went right through voicemail. I'm like, oh, this is easy. The 5th phone call, the person answered. By the end of it, my legs were shaking. Because at the same time, no matter how good of a salesperson you are, we don't like rejection. We don't like feeling uncomfortable, right? And just somebody being like, yeah, no, I don't want to talk to you. Stop bothering me. And you're just like, oh my goodness. that hurts, like, but at the same time, that's what makes us bigger, makes us better. So I love the reminder. It's been such a pleasure, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, man. It's been a blast.
Well, before we get into the last question, my man, again, I want to acknowledge you and thank you for coming on here. Where can folks learn more about you? Make sure you plug the Clubhouse Club, all that good stuff. Where can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm easiest to reach on IG now, ironically, because of Clubhouse, because I was never big on IG until Clubhouse. I was always a Twitter guy, but IG, you can reach me there. Certainly, feel free to tap in with us in the Hospitality Cash Flow Club, Clubhouse, and then the Hospitality Cash Flow podcast. Then I'm on LinkedIn, everywhere else too. So people can tap in. Noble Crawford, pretty easy to remember. So now I will say this: I am Noble Crawford III, right? So my dad is a junior. He's on all these platforms, and my oldest son is the fourth. He's on all these platforms. So make sure you're following the right one, right? There's a lot of us. So
Pops might be sending them some different YouTube videos at this point. Awesome, man. Well, the last question that we ask all of our guests is, what is your number one secret to success with short-term rentals?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say, honestly, man, it's never giving up, dude. That has I learned that through the experience with my wife. Like, I'm just I committed to myself at that point to literally just never give up. And that has pushed me more times than I can say. And so I encourage people, like, I heard recently mentioned the Clubhouse, quit on occasion, quit after lunch and start back the next morning, but never give up. Right. So you can quit on occasion, but don't ever give up. So that's my 2 cents.
So good. Had to drop one more nugget in there for everybody. Mr. Crawford, thank you so much for being here, man. Always a pleasure. Truly appreciate you. Always learning from you. And again, just acknowledging like your willingness to come on and share, and the insane amount of hours that you donate on Clubhouse, helping people get started.
What day is your room? What day is your room on Clubhouse? I think it's on Thursdays, right? Thursday night.
That's
so the
correct.
show comes out
Thursdays,
on
7 p.m. Central. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, brother. Well, thank you again for being here, and we'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys.
Hey, STR Nation, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. And in the comments, let us know what topics you want us to cover on upcoming episodes, and we'll make sure to get that in the books for you. And if you really want to learn how to launch, automate, and scale your short-term rental business, if you want to go deeper, then check out our free masterclass at strsecrets.com.